So hello and welcome to the 5th episode of the TES Leading and Learning webinar series. I'm Paul Spires, I'm founder of the New P&L Institute, and I'm host of the New P&L podcast. And I've been invited by TES to host this exclusive 10-part series, Leading and Learning, where we're providing insights, innovations, and inspiration for senior education leaders, and indeed all of those in the education sector who would like to enhance their leadership, build their performance, and help to transform their organization. In this week's episode, we're speaking to Sophie Wade, work futurist, work innovation specialist, global keynote speaker. She is also the founder of Flexcel and the author of Empathy Works, which will form some of the basis of the conversation with her today. Sophie, thank you so much for taking the time to join us on the TES Leading and Learning webinar series.
Paul, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm delighted to be here.
My pleasure. Let's perhaps start with a quick introduction to you. If you can tell the audience a little bit about who you are, what you do, and who you do it for.
So I'm Sophie Wade. I am British originally, but I do live in the States now, but I've lived all over the world, which is actually very instrumental in where I have come in my career. And I founded and am the Workforce Innovation Specialist at Flexcel Network. And there I am really helping people understand the new working environment, highly digitalized, and what that means in terms of the balance between technology and the talent focus, which is human-centric, and all focus really around the core of empathy, which is really understanding other people and sort of what they're thinking and how they're experiencing things.
Wonderful. And a big part of the conversation today is focused on your brilliant book, Empathy Works, the key to competitive advantage in a new era of work. And given the nature of TES, the Leading and Learning webinar series, and our audience, and leaders, managers, educators, administrators, teachers, right across all of those education sectors, I wanted to start with a question that will help to, I guess, define the context for our whole conversation. When we think about empathy, what is the difference between empathy, sympathy, compassion? Is it as simple as understanding and relating to others through taking the time to consider context and situation and circumstance? Or does in your mind, does it go deeper than that? What defines empathy?
So first, I'll define empathy as I look at it, and there are a number of other people. Not everybody sees it exactly the same way. So I'll just make that clear. So empathy is the ability to put yourself in somebody else's shoes and see the world through their eyes, and not just connect with how they think about the world, but also how they're feeling, how they're experiencing it, what they're going through. Now, the difference between empathy and sympathy is that sympathy, you can be sort of like, I feel like this, but oh, I'm so sorry that you feel like that. So it's not trying to connect with the same emotion. There isn't, and I've tried, there doesn't seem to be consensus about the difference between empathy and compassion. Some people define it, compassion, as having the action element to it, and empathy not. The way I and a number of other people see empathy in sort of three different steps. There's affective empathy, there's cognitive empathy, which is there's sort of the thinking connection, there's affective empathy, which is the feeling, and then there's empathetic action, which is a third piece of it, which is actually taking action based on the understanding. So there isn't agreement about compassion and empathy across everybody, but for me, I just focus on the fact that we need more compassion and empathy. So that's the most important thing of all.
You mentioned in that answer about standing in someone else's shoes to understand their position at any given moment in time. And often when I read about empathy, particularly in a business and an organizational context, it's often in relation to leadership offering empathy to employees, to other stakeholders. So those leaders needing to be more empathetic towards their employees. I very rarely read about empathy upwards, so to speak. So employees having empathy for the pressure and often the loneliness of leadership, which we often hear about on this podcast and many others as well. And it may be easier for a leader, I guess, in some regards to have empathy for other teachers and other administrators because they may have figuratively or literally been in their shoes. They may have been a geography teacher who's worked their way up to principal. But the other way around, that teacher may have never had leadership experience. So is this one of the biggest challenges in your perspective from an organizational context, that some can deliver empathy to others because they've experienced it, but it's harder for others to lift empathy upwards because of that lack of experience at a leadership level?
I would say it depends. For a start, I think certainly in the workplace, first of all, it can actually be sort of unhelpful for older people, sort of other older generations. I don't like to put labels on people, sort of older executives or seasoned executives. They look at the younger generations and imagine when they sort of maybe try and put themselves in their shoes or imagine what they're going through,
Hmm.
they believe that they don't recognize how different things are from when they actually came into the workplace.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
they actually have they think they know, but they actually don't know because so much has changed. So that is sort of really not very helpful. I think that there are other ways to have to be able to connect. Common ground, as you say, is very important to be able to connect about things, to sort of say, like, where are we on the same side, Paul? What
Hmm.
is it? Is it, do we like binge watching the same TV show? Do we like the same, do we support the same football team? There are different things that can help us connect and help us understand that we do have areas where there's either overlap or we see things exactly the same way. So using those, it's really important to connect in these different ways. It doesn't have to be exactly the same experience, because generally people's experiences are so different. Even if we've both been geography teachers for 10 years, we've had different classes, different makeup, different groups of people, and we've
Yes.
responded in different ways because of our context, because of our background, because of my mother was actually a teacher. Your mother wasn't necessarily. So how we teach is going to be different. And all of those factors come into play.
The answer you gave at the top of that, talking about, let's say, a principal who was a teacher once and looks at that teacher's concern that's been raised and says, well, I had to do that in my day, whatever it happens to be. And there is that disconnect.
Mhm.
What does that leader need to do in that moment, that principal, that senior leader, manager need to do in that moment to create that moment of self-awareness to actually say, I might have been in a similar position, but the context has changed. What can they do? What tools and techniques can they use to check themselves in that moment?
In that moment is harder. Well, put it differently. There's always questions that you can ask, and I'm always recommending, and I might even insist that people really try and ask questions and make sure that they check what somebody meant.
Yes.
However, laying the groundwork for that is very, very important. So that in a moment of high pressure or high stress, particularly, that you don't default to a sort of uninformed position, because you
Yes.
actually do know that person and you do have an understanding. So creating that empathetic relationship, creating those deeper connections and understanding of people is going to help when you in that moment to actually think, hang on a second, did Paul really mean that? And hopefully there's time to say, hang on, Paul, I don't want to misunderstand you. I thought you said this. Is that what you meant? So typically is a moment to be able to check that whether you understood what the person said or not, and be able to make that connection more effectively.
Can we have too much empathy? At what point does empathy create inertia in an organization, becomes counterproductive or ineffectual culturally or organizationally? Can we have too much empathy?
There are certainly some people. I have several friends who are typically maybe known as empaths.
Hmm.
So they actually really they can't. It's very hard for them to sometimes to create boundaries. If you are having a really bad day, an empath might be kind of, oh, Paul, oh my goodness, and connect so deeply with the challenges or the suffering that you're going through, that actually they take on so much burden that it becomes problematic for them.
Hmm.
Empathy itself is not about giving you everything that you want or connecting with all of your pain. We actually have what they call mirror neurons. So what it means is, let's just say you drop your phone. I'm like, oh gosh, because I know what it feels like. I know I've been there. And our brains actually mirror what happened, but to a lesser degree. So
Right.
the point about this is that in sort of human relationships, and Dr. Helen Reese of Harvard Medical School goes into this in her research, and she says, it's the basis of human understanding and reciprocity and human relationships, because if I'm able to connect with and literally feel to a lesser degree the pain or the situation or the frustration you felt because you dropped your phone, then one, I can help you. I'm not suffering so much that I actually can come forward and help you. And this basis of reciprocity, because if I do help you, then another time I am going to feel, not necessarily consciously, but I'm going to feel like Paul's likely to help me if I smash my phone, and he might, lend me his or something like that. So there is a sort of mirroring of the situation, which enables me to connect with what you're going through.
It prompts another question that's sort of related to one of the other answers you gave as well. You talked, I think, in your first answer about the three characteristics of empathy, and the third being action, empathy in action. And I just wonder whether we sometimes miss in organizations or in our desire to be more empathetic. We demonstrate the feeling of empathy and the cognitive empathy, but we don't take enough action on empathy. So we talk a lot about hearing people, but not about perhaps addressing the points that they've made that you've heard. And I wonder whether that creates sometimes a culture that is anti-empathetic, that almost you do more damage by demonstrating empathy, but not taking action on it.
If you don't take action, yes, because if I have listened to you and you feel heard and you're like, oh, she heard me. And let's just say you ask employees and you're sort of like, okay, please give feedback. And then you don't do anything about it. It really is, it feels very disrespectful. It feels insulting. I'm like, well, why on earth did she ask or he ask? Why on earth, get my opinion? I spent all that time and effort and energy giving my thoughts and some suggestions about how we might make improvements. So it's really important to take that action, that informed action, and actually, take some steps, because then you also not only can make improvements, which everybody recognizes, and oh, thank you, Paul. Yeah, he listened to me. That's great. Also, it means that next time you ask, I'm actually going to also put the effort in. So that's really, really important to take that action. I do want to go back to that last, because I didn't, that last answer, because I didn't mention the fact that when you have empaths who you need to be sort of really trying to encourage them to create that boundary, one of the things about this, the sort of dynamic is, so it's not about me getting everything that I want. It's not about me listening to you and giving you everything that you want. I call it like a balance of needs. The whole point about getting more information from you is that then I have a much more, not full, complete, but a much more full picture of what's going on. Not only do I understand your perspective and how you're experiencing it, and hopefully I have enough of self-awareness, that's really important, of my own opinion and how it came about. But then we can have a much more informed discussion, because I'm really listening to you and I'm trying to encourage you to listen to me too.
Balance and needs point is a really, really interesting point, because I think often when we go to a leader and we hope that we will be heard, I think sometimes innately, because we have the challenge and we want to be heard, we don't recognize that there's a reciprocal empathy to be given to that person, that there is actually something that we need to give other than just our opinion or our concern. And I wondered whether you see that in some of the work you do in the organizations you work with. There's an expectation that empathy should only be given rather than a recognition that there needs to be a balance within that conversation.
Yes, it is something. I mean, sometimes in organizations, I'm asked to be connecting with the managers and helping them be more empathetic. And sometimes I'm like, okay, it's actually maybe the senior people who need it a bit more. So I'm always trying to do the sort of lower level employees and the people who are managing them, because
Yes.
it really is a reciprocal, it's a mutually basis, just like, it needs to be done on a mutual basis. And indeed, the managers or leaders need to be modeling it. They need to be modeling the behavior and talking about it all the time, every day. Interesting, in the UK, Handelsbanken UK, which is originally a Swiss, it's a
Yes.
multinational European, cross-European, trans-European bank. They have a sort of booklet, it's like 35 pages, I think, called Our Way. And in it, it talks about all the sort of cultural elements which have trust, and is very much about human-centered values and sort of empathy and understanding people. And they live it all the time. I mean, it is on pretty much everybody's desk. And there are branches that, pick a value or an aspect of what's in this Our Way booklet and talk about it, and maybe have a KPI or a sort of goal which is related to that aspect of their culture or of this sort of human-centric way of being and way of acting with each other. or with clients too. And then at the end of the week, they'll sort of go back and recap and say, well, how did that manifest? How do you see that go with customers? What kind of reactions? What results did you find? So modeling it and making sure that the managers are really exemplifying it, and then really doing that encouraging. So it is top down and bottom up to make sure, sort of like, oh, so Paul, so how about when you're talking with Tom, let's just hear what Tom had to say. I'm not quite sure that we understood it correctly. Like really trying to prompt the people to be encouraging everybody to listen to each other, to check that what they understood what was made. Really, and when you can, to take that time to do that, because sometimes when we don't have time, that's when that wiggle room, that sort of giving each other grace, it becomes so important.
Given that most humans, I guess it's an essential part of the human condition, whatever we do, there is an element of it, some more than others, but there's an element in everyone that we do something, we think, what's in this for us at some level. I wondered if you could outline for the audience, what does empathy give the giver rather than just the receiver? How do we grow? How do we build? How do we develop ourselves through giving the time to become a more empathetic individual or leader?
Lovely question. Thank you. So I think, first of all, empathy, in my book, there's a chapter that says, like, it starts with you.
Yes.
You have to have enough self-awareness, because I can't possibly imagine what's going on with you and how you see the world and how you might be affected by this, that, and the other if I'm not aware enough about myself. You don't have to be, go into deep kind of like, who am I type thing. I mean, that's helpful, but not necessary. So there's this self-awareness, which in going through that, a little bit of that journey, you actually find out some interesting things about yourself, which is helpful in all kinds of things. And then in practicing empathy and enhancing your empathy skills, it really means that you and I can have a better conversation. We can have better meetings, better outcomes, in a team. And let's just say I'm the manager. That's going to be helpful because it's going to be much easier to get better results, because there'll be fewer misinterpretations, fewer miscommunications. I don't jump to judgments. I don't make assumptions. I'm kind of like, okay, Paul, what that face that you're, I'm not quite sure exactly what's going on with Paul. Let me ask, not a closed question like, you doing okay? Which is a yes, no answer. Like, how are you doing, Paul? Oh, I remember, my dog there's an issue with my dog. I remember there was something going on with one of your pets, right? Are they okay? And that way just draws you out so you can feel comfortable to share something. And then actually I can work out what might need, how I could help you, or what might support the situation better so that we can have a better meeting, or even put the meeting off for another time when you aren't distracted.
You discuss in the book how organizations can obtain a sustainable competitive advantage by cultivating that more empathetic culture and a more human-centric work environment. Clearly, schools aren't naturally competitive, but they do want to lift their performance of leaders, of teachers, of students. So they are high performance led in that way. Can you talk our listeners through the mechanics of how we create that competitive advantage by cultivating that more empathetic culture?
So if you think about, like, if I'm trying to get, whether it's a group of students or a team at work, the more I understand each person, how each person works best, the better I can help them understand themselves and set themselves up for success in terms of how they work. If Tom, who's a student or one of my team, gets really distracted working in the same environment as other people, maybe I sort of say, well, can you go and work off in the corner of the classroom? Or, why didn't you finish that project working from home? Because that's going to enable you to be more successful. And, you, Paul, might thrive on just like bars and environment, and you bounce ideas off people, and that's going to help you be most successful. Then I can really try and understand, how to get the most out of each person and how to help them. It's not just sort of like getting the most out of someone.
Yes.
It's terrible, it's an easy way to put it, but it's also helping someone be successful and recognize and helping and sort of leaning into like what makes Paul successful, what helps him having, also steering this some really interesting Gallup data, which shows that when managers orientate employees towards their skills and strengths, engagement goes up, which increases profits, which increases revenues. And that is because if you're good at something, if you're strong in something, you'll typically, enjoy it more. And the more you enjoy it, the better you perform, the more engaged you are, and the results go up as a result, as an outcome. So if I want to have a successful team or be competitive in my work environment, the more I can really connect with people and help them be successful and also interact at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
There's an interesting aspect of teams, and this goes to a classroom too, and all of these things. But there are aspects of teams, it's not just the skills or it's not just the sort of hard work skills, like this person's good at strategy and this person's good at, numbers. But it's also a question, like, you always have a team, sort of a cheerleader. You have someone who, keeps people on track. Now, I'm kind of like a cheerleader type. So in that environment, if I sort of say, okay, Paul, you're the person who's going to keep everybody on track and make sure the project actually comes up to fruition at the deadline, by the end of the week at school or something like that, that also helps you understand your skills and
Yes.
helps the team be successful. So understanding people's skills and helping them sort of really recognize what I'm good at, what you're good at, all the other people in my group, because there's much more teamwork at school now. Anticipating how they're going to be working when they go into the workforce. So all these different elements are going to enable each person individually and as a team be successful.
So I'd just like to expand on that a little bit more. There's a fantastic range of exercises in your book, Empathy Works, throughout the book to help individuals practice, focus on embedding more empathetic thoughts, processes, and actions. I think it'd be great just to spend a couple of minutes providing some practical examples, some tools that our listeners can take away and look to apply in their business or their organization tomorrow.
Sure. So, the book really, just as we've been talking about, it starts off on the theory level, like, why are we here? Why is this different? And technology does have a big sort of piece of it, certainly in the workplace, because we're working at a different pace. We're working much more in teams. We're having to be more attuned to each other so that we can, work at this, faster pace. It's much more unpredictable. So it's on that sort of like, why are we here? And then trying to get practical about it, because in order to really understand how this actually plays out for me in my day, in my classroom, or with my team, just breaking it down into little pieces is going to be helpful to make, and because I get super practical.
Yes.
So some of the exercises, for example, in a meeting or going to a meeting, which could be with faculty, for example, or with my team or other managers at my level, for example. What do I know about these people? What do I know about these students? How can I sort of tune into who are the people that I'm dealing with?
Mm-hmm.
What are their positions? So preparing. I sort of look at meetings in three sort of stages, and break it down into little pieces. So one of them is kind of like what I call the preamble, the preparation. Kind of like, who are these people? What do I think about? What opinions do they have? How do I think? And a lot of people, you actually do that. So, but that is empathizing. It's like, what position is this person in, and what opinion do they have, and where do I align with them, and where don't I? So being sort of prepared, but it includes putting yourself in someone else's shoes and trying to have an understanding of where they're coming from. Then when you get to the meeting, particularly if you're going to be tackling something which is kind of tough, that you know that there are some areas where you don't agree. First of all, start off with sort of connecting. So, Paul, right, God, how have you been? Did you have, did you come into the office? Was it a bad commute? Empathizing with each other, like trying to get a sense of what mindset is Paul in? Is he a little bit aggravated because, it was I don't know, it was raining and there was terrible traffic or something like that. And if there's a lot of maybe elevated emotions, I might take a pause and just kind of go, okay, well, let's just, just take a 5 minute, we'll just get this set up in a little bit, so that it doesn't take long. It only takes a few minutes for emotions to come down so that we can set this off on the best, have the best start to the meeting. And then another piece of it is connecting to make sure that we are remembering that we have common ground. So connecting on some personal level so that we both remember where we agree, where we actually have some great memories. It doesn't have to be long, but just making that those sort of human connections and remembering that we actually do enjoy we did enjoy going bowling together recently as a sort of offsite, or that we we might have pets or kids, or we share some kind of personal information that's going to just help us connect. And then as you get into the meeting, also making sure that you sort of start with the areas of a particular topic where you do have agreement. So again, even as you're getting a sort of approaching the more difficult areas of the conversation, that you've already established, we do have something in common, we do have areas of agreement,
Yes.
and then moving forward. And the last one I'll say is checking that you understand, particularly when you're dealing with the classroom, or let's say that from the earlier question you had about a principal versus teachers or much younger kids. Words have very different meanings.
Yes.
And it's not wicked meaning good or not or bad, and this really was a huge epiphany for me at a particular conference. And the person who was sort of on the stage at one point, he was sort of in his 50s, and he was talking to, it happened to be a millennial at that point. And he just said, hang on a second, please, can you say the first thing that comes into your head when I say the next phrase? And the guy was like, okay, fine. And he said, lifelong employment, lifelong employment.
Mm-hmm.
And the guy said, the millennial said, well, of course I'll be working all my life. And I was like, oh my goodness, because I'm Gen X. That's not what I thought of.
Yes. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I've actually said this to other millennials and also Gen Zs, and they do not say lifelong employment means having one job at one company. Does not. So just a phrase or career typically in the past, for someone like a Gen X, when you came in and had a career, you probably stayed in the same kind of job, maybe not always at the same company, but the same kind of job, maybe a few different companies all your life. Now, completely different. So simple words don't have the same meanings, and it really is important to have a practice of checking what the other person meant by what they said, because that really is it, because otherwise it leads to assumptions and making judgments often, which sometimes can be helpful, but in these kind of contexts it's not.
That's a really, really interesting point. Is empathy a fleeting and contextual characteristic, or is it a consistent characteristic? Do we learn it, or is it natural within us? Do empaths really exist, or is it that most of us simply have the ability to empathize if the context is right?
I think, well, Frans de Waal is a Dutch primatologist, and he says, and several others as well, say absolutely this is this is sort of second nature to us. This is we're born with it as babies. It's part of surviving in order to be able to have these reciprocal relationships and mutual understanding. Some people aren't as empathetic as others, and certainly just the phrase "it's not business." Sorry, it's not personal, it's business, goes to show how much we have actually tried to push empathy out of the workplace in many situations. So I think we certainly can learn it, we can practice it, and create habits which may feel contrived at first, but then when we start getting used to it, it just becomes natural and we don't even think about it. We sort of like, it's the road less traveled in our brains, literally, and it's just sort of easier for us to do it. But it does take some setup to actually create those new habits. But people can absolutely learn it. For some people, it definitely is harder, particularly the connecting with the emotion. It doesn't mean that one shouldn't try and empathize if you only are just trying to connect with, because the hardest piece often is actually really trying to understand what you, Paul, how you see the world, how you see this particular situation, and asking enough questions, or really trying to understand, like, did Paul have other data that I didn't see? I mean, like, what's with his opinion of his? But so that's really important. If you can't connect with somebody's emotion, and you can practice that. It's like, we get excited, when a team, wins, or with an emotion in a movie. These type of things can be helpful for recognizing when you feel the same way as somebody else does. But just going to the point of kind of like saying, oh, Paul, I can see that you're excited, or I can, even if I can't feel it, but recognize that emotion becomes important too.
I'd like to explore that connecting with emotion a little bit more. And when we think about empathy, it relies heavily on two things, amongst many other things, but two things in my mind. One is deeper context, the story that surrounds the moment, as we've said several times in the conversation today. And the other is time, the time to consider the situation, to draw in that context and consider everything and empathize as a result. And you describe this in your book as think, feel, and act. However, one of the most pervasive parts of many of our lives today is social media, and that lacks both of these things. It offers little opportunity for context, driving a bit of emotional dissonance. And also, the sort of the immediate nature of social media reduces the time element of it, if you like. We're expected to respond, react, whatever it happens to be in a moment's notice. So at a time when we need perhaps more empathy in our organizations and in our lives than ever before, we're actually in danger of drifting further away from it because of these extraneous or external circumstances. How do we address this in the education sector? Because that doesn't exist in a microcosm. Students and adults are on their phones, they're in social media, so they don't have the time, they don't have the context, but that's what empathy needs.
Agreed. I think, one of the things when I observe some of I have two Gen Z kids, so one's at high school, and one's just finished university, in fact. And I pay a lot of attention to, for example, Snapchat. So let's just think about Snapchat. Snapchat is basically a text with some emotion. So first of all, it was like a text, and then you add emojis in order to allow people to understand what you meant. So
Yes.
adding an emotional element, very basic, but I mean, effectively, that's what an emoji is trying to do. Because, and how often, I mean, emails are not a great medium, nor is text, in terms of, because you really made it short, be right back, or let me know, or whatever it is. So it doesn't, but if you put a smiley face, kind of like, let me know, so there are actually lots of things which have come into play from younger people in order to try and add some more emotions, to try and
Yes.
add some context. So a Snapchat basically is like, here I am, I'm smiling or whatever, and the text that goes with it. And then we add videos. So yes, there's an immediate element to it. I think that we can respond, we don't have to respond immediately. We can take a little bit, even a few seconds, because we're not talking about huge amounts of time to kind of go, let me think about what Paul is really like. If we have taken time, we've taken some time, out of the classroom, out of the office, or, at the end of a video call or something like that, just kind of go, oh God, I'm exhausted. How has your week been? And really connect as people. That really helps us in those more challenging, faster paced moments to really understand, what's going on. Paul J. Zak has done some really interesting work about trust. In fact, it was focused on engagement,
Right.
engagement in the workplace, and trust is really, really important for engagement, so that I can feel safe, so I can feel comfortable, and then I can actually focus on my work and not sort of go to fight or flight mode. But in that work, he was really looking at how we can better, in those moments of stress, the chemical oxytocin is actually suppressed. And the oxytocin is really related to trust, and trust and confidence and feeling comfortable with people. So it goes, trust and empathy are so very, very related in that sense. So in moments of stress, oxytocin is suppressed. So at that moment, when we're really stressed, when we really need to be trusting each other, to be empathizing with each other, it's the hardest to do that.
Yes.
So that is where having these relationships or having better connections, we don't have to be friends, you don't have to be friends with your teacher or vice versa, but understanding who they are and where they're coming from, and being able to have a wider understanding of who that person is, and which also helps me kind of go, well, how might Paul think about this? Okay, how can I say it in a way that's going to land? Just saying how I might say it, that's not helpful. Saying it in a way that you're going to understand it from your context, understanding your background, is going to help us have the most fruitful conversation.
I guess in some regards, then, empathy relies on creating, in whatever organization you are, creating a community rather than a collection of individuals. The deeper your community is, the more interdependent you are in a positive way, the conversations that we have around the cliched water cooler and everything else, that is all part of the development, the sense of belonging that all breeds empathy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, empathy, inclusion, belonging, and all of these things, and trust is so important. And as a leader, creating an environment and creating a culture of trust so that people can speak up, so that people do feel comfortable to learning in a classroom, speaking up in a staff meeting at a school. These are moments where you really want to hear from people. You want them to be comfortable saying, well, I'm not actually sure that is the best way to approach this. Maybe we can do it. Maybe we can do it away. Or even that wasn't a really great way to say that. Maybe rather than saying this, that wasn't the best way to do it, just say, yes, and how about this idea that we could also experiment with and see how this is going? So creating that community where you are empathizing with each other, you are showing that each person is trying to understand the other person. And, if they don't manage it, be open, empathetic, and understanding, and kind of go, well, Paul, okay, I didn't say that very well as I just did. Like, this is a better way to for me to maybe say it. Did that land? Did you understand that? And then hopefully I'm trying to lure you into sort of saying, well, what I did understand was this, and is that correct? So then we start having much more fruitful. We've got rid of the misunderstandings and miscommunications, and we're actually talking about what we're supposed to be talking about.
Whether we're in business or the education sector or any other organizational sector industry, KPIs and measurement are key to all of our lives today. I wondered, from an empathetic culture perspective, can we identify, obviously, when we feel that culture has moved towards one that has empathy as a foundation? Are there certain key identifiers within a culture that if someone walked in, a new teacher walked into an organization, they would see that this is an empathetic culture by A, B, or C?
Yes, I think the speed with which someone feels comfortable that they can speak up. I mean, this is where onboarding in a work situation,
Yes.
or when a new student or a new teacher comes,
Mm.
how quickly somebody is like, oh, Paul, hey, look, you've got to meet Margie, you've got to meet Alessandra over here, like, connect with them, and somebody else. If you have this issue, then Janet, she's the best person for that. And automatically you kind of go, oh, okay, so I'm not supposed to be brilliant from day one. People are really going to help me. They're open to me asking questions. They're trying to make me part of the group and making sort of you feel that, you know where to go. You feel comfortable asking silly questions. And, those are some of the ways that people can be sort of understand quickly what the culture of an organization or a school might be.
Yeah.
And the more it is visible and talked about, as I was saying with Handelsbanken, it is, whether it's on the wall, if it's on the wall, it needs to be talked about and lived by
Yes.
the principal of the school, by the different faculties, so that it is something that really is lived and breathed daily. And then, so when somebody new comes in and that this is shared with them, and it's very clear to them from the very beginning that these are not just words, these are actions too, and these are behaviors that no matter where someone is, and particularly when we're working, more remotely, we're working in a more distributed fashion, or when the students are in, go to different classrooms, it needs to be consistent. They need to know that,
Yes.
like, oh my goodness, when I go to this person's class, oh wow, beware, because that's like there typically is like a scary teacher, right? But we try and make sure that at least if it's a scary teacher, that at least kind of like the basic foundation of what's acceptable and what's not. And if somebody behaves in and it behaves in a way that is not according to these values, which are, spoken about and celebrated, that there are repercussions, so that it is clear that that is not okay, and we don't accept that, and so that people know that they can feel safe.
I often call those words on the wall vinyl values because their commitment is
Oh,
about
I
as
like
thin
that.
as the vinyl they're printed on. And it's how you
Yeah.
bring them off the wall and live them. I think that's the critical element. They become a substitute for rather than a demonstration of far too often, I think.
Yes, very much so.
Sophie, we always end this podcast episode or the webinar episode with a summary of three concise and final pieces of actionable wisdom that our educational leaders can take away. And
Okay.
in keeping with the TES acronym, we like to have one based on TES. So T
Okay.
is for talk. When it comes to empathy and empathetic leadership, what's the most important thing educational leaders can do to more effectively communicate the principles of empathetic leadership to their school or their college or their educational establishment?
So I would say, just as we were just talking about, is talking about it, and not just talking, but acting upon it as well, and also encouraging other people to talk. So it's a two-way street, and really that getting other people to be talking, and so you're not just the command and control leader, but you're inviting everybody to
Mhm.
bring their ideas and have those discussed. Would be my T.
And E is for excite. So when it comes to empathy, what is the most important thing leaders can do to excite those within an organization to help them to engage and embrace and believe in the value of empathetic leadership?
So I think to begin with, some people may not be so excited about it, but curiosity, they can be excited by curiosity, kind of like, is this going to work? I mean, is this
Yes.
really going to make a difference? And then they can get excited when they see, now I you don't necessarily, employee surveys are a way of getting that feedback, but if there are ways which are, anecdotal or your own lived experiences in a classroom, like, wow, that actually really made a difference to how people felt and how much people talked, more people talk, or in my staff meeting, so you can be those rewarding feedbacks where you see and hear how differently people feel when empathy is much more prevalent and present at a meeting. Then that can really be rewarding and excite people.
And the third is sustain. How do leaders ensure that they maintain a sustainable commitment to empathetic leadership over time? So it doesn't become a group of empathetic individuals, it becomes core to the organizational's thinking and its culture.
So that's why I have these empathy habits in the book. So going from the theory to the practice, and having these habits, these little things, which will say at the beginning of a meeting, and you prepare, you understand who these people are, and you ask questions, having these habits, which then, as I said, they're a little bit contrived to start with, but then they become part of the natural way of being. And I also did a lot of sort of research into habits in this Charles Duhigg, and in terms of how you do that. And often it really is having a buddy to get you started. So
Yes.
you and I, Paul, kind of like, you may be starting a different habit. Maybe you're trying to go to the gym more, and I'm trying to start an empathy habit, but you're helping me be accountable. And in a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, someone say, well, how's that going? So I'm like, well, this one's going well, but this one not so much. So we kind of like work out a way to help me to sort of be on that track, and work out a way, whether it's connecting habits together or connecting a new habit with a routine, so it's sort of easier to remember. And then once it's sustained, then I'm golden. And when also the great thing about empathy habits, it's all in the sort of the same vein, it's all in the same idea, and they really are compounding. So when
Yes.
I've done this and I've done that, and I'm listening, and I'm like really, nodding, oh yeah, yeah, because that's really helping you understand that I am listening. Absolutely. All of these are compounding, and it really does support an overall, in general, environment. And the great thing is that empathy is a value and a mindset, as well as being really important skills. So it does become pervasive without too much effort. I do think
Yes.
it is natural to us.
Great piece of advice to end with. Sophie, for those who would like to learn more about what you do, to purchase your book, where do they go? How do they find you?
So LinkedIn is actually a really good place to find, because there's lots of stuff I'm always posting, and I have a podcast called Transforming Work. But on LinkedIn, also Flexcell Network is the company where we're helping organizations sort of understand about empathy and infuse the sort of the human-centric approach. I also have sophiewade.com where you can find me and do a lot of speaking and workshops and all that kind of stuff.
Wonderful. Thank you. And we'll include the links in the notes that accompany the webinar. Sophie, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much for your time today.
It's been such a great pleasure. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you once again for watching episode 5 of the TES Leading and Learning webinar series. If you'd like to learn more about what Sophie does and order a copy of her book, you'll find the links in the notes that accompany this webinar. I look forward to speaking to you again next month in episode 6. Thank you once again for watching, and speak soon.